Great. And can everybody, well, I hope everybody can hear me, and I'll make an effort. Marina, does this sound okay?
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you so much, Eileen.
What? Okay, thank you. I'm not going to spend a big long time with a big introduction. I want to dive in because we've got so much great content today. I'll just give you quick highlights and invite you to certainly take a deeper dive by looking at my websites if you'd like. So I'm a certified coach. I specialize in leadership development, career management, communications, and I've been doing that since 2003. My company's called Big Cheese Coaching, and I also have a 20-something year background in professional communications, and you could read a little bit more about that in Chadnick Communications. But I like to say, to pull all that together, I have conversations for a living. And more recently, the last 2 years, I've been engaging in something called conversational intelligence, and I'm a core skills coach in that area. And lastly, just some of you will remember me from a couple years ago when I presented a webinar called Ease, and was based on a book that I authored called Ease, Manage Overwhelm in Times of Crazy Busy. And I bring that into the introduction because sometimes our listening skills have a lot to do with us being so busy and distracted and stressed. So I think it kind of plays a part. So I'm going to invite you to think of a time when you felt truly heard. And it could be any context of your work and or your life. And you might also, if this comes more readily to you, consider a time when maybe you gave somebody the gift of being heard and you allowed them to really, truly, speak and have that presence of you truly listening. And chances are that really, whether you were on the receiving end or the giving end, that was a real gift. When there is quality listening and connecting, people will feel respected. There's more chance of greater understanding and clarity. It's a great opportunity to build trust. And a big piece is that there's usually a feeling of care and connecting. If you're listening and truly listening with the right spirit and the right dynamics, that care and connecting is actually quite huge. And that leads to better relationships, across the board of professional, personal, with all stakeholders, and even better performance, because whether it be engagement, whether it be clarity. So the gift of listening is something that is very, very precious, and we all have it in us to give it, and we likely do in many facets of our lives. I'm sure everybody on this call does have plenty of times and moments and examples when they just gave that wonderful gift of listening. That said, being human and all, we all can miss the mark. And I'm going to tell you that I'm right with you on that. I know I'm in good company because I consider myself a pretty good conversationalist and a pretty good listener. But just as we go through today's presentation, I'm really not speaking from a higher place. I'm really standing with you. There are occasions when we just seem to miss it. We're talking at each other. We might be really too busy trying to win an argument, trying to get our ideas across, or even trying to negotiate. Our attention might not be fully present. We might be multitasking, but even if we're not, we might appear to be listening, but we might actually be thinking about other things. And that old reliance on email gets in the way too. That can really get in the way of being heard, depending on how we email and what we say, of other people truly hearing us, and in return, the interpretations we make in terms of how we listen and read into emails we receive. You know, I love this quote. Mark Twain said, "If we were meant to talk more than listen, we would have 2 mouths and 1 ear." And I think it's just a nice way to underscore how important listening is. But what I want to do is bring a quote in that's a little closer to our, modern day, and in fact, today. So this is Judith E. Glaser, and she's the author of Conversational Intelligence. And not only that, she was the Sherpa, the guide for a program that coalesced coaches from around the world. The last 2 years, she's been creating a cohort of coaches who are focusing on this area of conversational intelligence to encourage people to really start to tune in to the conversations we're having. And you'll hear more about this in the presentation. In terms of, conversational intelligence has a lot to do with more than just the words that are exchanged. There's neuroscience and there's relationship impact and all kinds of dynamics at play. Listening is absolutely core to conversational intelligence, and it is the alchemy of trust. So this quote captures a lot of what we're going to talk about today beautifully. Listening to connect is the most powerful catalyst for human growth known to human beings. When we listen to connect, we open and expand the space, allowing our aspirational self to emerge. We think out loud with them and co-create with them, and with them we all experience ourselves in a new way. And so this is really the power of listening. And what we'll talk about in our time together is the whys and ways of listening through the lens of conversational intelligence. I'm going to identify some of the barriers and blind spots, 3 conversational levels and the listening that goes with it, and strategies for better listening. Now, by the time we get to the strategy for better listening, you guys will already have been thinking of those ideas. And so that's why it will be, towards the end of our time together, I'll have 15 strategies, and I'll probably be speaking fairly quickly. Because what I want you to do is I want you to stay tuned right from the get-go of things you should be doing more of and things you should be doing less of. And with regards to 3 conversational levels, I want to prime you for listening for that as well, because as we get to that part, one of the things we talk about a lot in conversational intelligence is level 3 conversations, and particularly level 3 listening. So in order to have an appreciation for that, I'm going to briefly share what those 3 levels are. But when we get to those strategies, it's really level 3. It's really high quality listening. So I'm priming you to listen for that. And I'm also priming you to already start thinking about things you need to do less of, things you need to do more of. Because each one of us on the call does have an innate ability to listen well. So I'm not going to be teaching you a brand new skill that you don't have. I'm going to be reminding you and reinforcing and getting you back to the beautiful skill that is inside of you and ready to be invited back out. So the whys and ways of listening. I wanted to really put that out more through the lens of a little case study. And it's a made-up case study because I just pulled together some truths from various experiences and people. But it's going to be helpful because as we go through the ideas and the solutions and in this presentation, I'd like to keep bringing Chloe and Nick with us. So Chloe and Nick work independently, separately at different not-for-profit organizations, and they were about to have a meeting with a prospective donor, 2 separate meetings. We're going to call the donor John. And John had an idea. He wanted to leave an endowment, and he was thinking he would go with the organization that Chloe works at. It's a well-known, good, strong organization. But he thought he should talk to a couple before making his decision. So, as Chloe was getting ready for this meeting, I have to tell you she was stressed. She had a lot going on, and she was at a deadline in terms of meeting her targets. She was hoping to get, she's a senior level donor relationship management manager, and she really wanted to get, her target, and this new opportunity represented something big for her. So she did a lot of preparation. She researched him and came up with some ideas of what he was about, what he would like, what he'd want. She put together lots of great ideas. She even rehearsed objections and key messages and what she would say. And all of this is that's okay to do. That's pretty darn good. But when she went into the meeting, she was so focused on her kind of the stories and her notes and kind of selling that something went amiss, and she just didn't connect with John. And she missed some things that could have been discovered that would have helped her kind of better understand him and to connect and build trust And, he was almost ready to sign the check when he had called her, but she kind of blew it. And Nick, on the other hand, when he got the call, he certainly did some homework to understand a little bit what this gentleman was about, did a little research. He's in the news, this fellow John, because he's a businessman, a local guy, and there's a little bit known about him. But he put together some initial thought starters, but most importantly, his preparation was about getting him in a mode where he'd get more curious, and he wanted to listen and to engage and to connect. And so he kind of put a little bit more emphasis on that and less about, his pitch. What happened was, in the meeting, he did connect, and the conversation kind of went to places that was enabled Nick to understand where John was coming from. And John, actually, who hadn't disclosed this off the bat to Chloe, but he had put out a hint that he was wanting to leave an endowment because he had lost a brother when he was younger, and there was some connection. He was trying to do something. Nick found this out because he heard a little hint of something and explored it, said, tell me more about that. Whereas Chloe kind of didn't catch that. And, well, as I said earlier, there were two different outcomes. Nick earned the endowment, and unfortunately, Chloe didn't. Now, I want to make clear that this is not a talk about endowment strategies or donor fund. I think the people in the audience know a lot more than I do about what to do well and what not to do well for donor relations. I'm just using this example to highlight some of the listening ideas or listening skills that we're going to talk about today. And what I want to just reinforce is that we've all been Chloe at times, definitely myself included. And so you might think about it could be in a board meeting, it could be in a volunteer meeting, it could be with a colleague, it could be with a direct report, it could be with somebody in your personal life where something went not quite right, and it really could be attributed to the conversation just somehow didn't connect, and that might have impacted the results, it might have impacted the relationship. And so we're going to get us all thinking about that and really be accepting of ourselves that we've all been Chloe at times. And when we're not listening, it's helpful to make the invisible more visible. And that's one of the things that conversational intelligence does. It tries to get us to become more aware of the barriers and blind spots. And once we know those barriers and blind spots, we could already start to get a little bit more aware of what we should do more of, what we should do less of. So just a few of the many is stress is a big barrier, because when we're stressed, it tends to trigger some of the other blind spots. We tune in superficially. We don't truly listen at a deeper level. We miss things. Sometimes we go into conversations with an already knowing mindset filled with assumptions, and that narrows our listening, and we miss things as well. And it also creates an I-centric kind of listening. And then the last one is sometimes we get addicted to our own ideas, and we have trouble being open to other possibilities, and it narrows our listening for possibility. So we're going to be expanding on all of this as we go. And the first one I want to expand a little bit in is the neuroscience of all of this. Because one of the things that we know is that stress constricts your listening ability. So I'm going to bring back Chloe just for purposes of explaining this. When Chloe started to feel very stressed about, making her targets on fundraising, and then she was really kind of, psyched up for this meeting, but then didn't feel very comfortable in the meeting. There was some lack of connection. It starts to trigger the distrust brain, the amygdala, and you start to get a little bit into this protective stance and the fight or flight response. Cortisol is the neurochemistry that takes over. Now, what happens when that occurs is that it shuts down the part of your brain. If you take a look at where the forehead is, the prefrontal cortex, that's where trust lives. And that is where all of the executive functions get regulated. Things like being able to listen, being able to have a wider perspective, being able to have empathy and put yourself in somebody else's shoes, being able to self-regulate and even recognize when you are stressed and to be able to make good decisions about self-regulating. So what happens when we are stressed, and it could just be overload, it's not always a situation like what I've described, Chloe, but it could be a moment in time. What happens is our listening ability closes down. And I really want to highlight that because it's not just personality and it's not just good or bad habits. There's neurochemistry involved. But the good news is if we learn to navigate and recognize these triggers, and we learn to self-manage, we could at least prime ourselves and our brains to be more primed for healthier conversational dynamics, healthier neurochemistry, so that we are at least not getting in our own way. So the other thing, too, is when you start to have a good conversation, and you de-escalate your own stress and you're in a calmer place, you open up those abilities to listen better and connect more. The implication and the action item for you is to think about how you start conversations and how you prepare yourself before conversations so that you could take care to make sure that your trust brain is alive and well and not being geared down. But even things like what Nick did well in the conversation with John was, rather than diving in so quickly, and I know most of you would know this, particularly anybody in donor relations, but in any conversation is a little bit of how are you today, and anything that puts somebody else at ease will do good for both of you to be connecting and to listening just from a neurochemistry point of view, okay? So that's really important. Now, we all fall into the trap of unlistening from time to time, and sometimes it's the neuroscience, as I just explained. But other times it's just our habits or the stress. As I mentioned, I feel like I'm an expert on overwhelm. I too experience overwhelm, and I coach a lot of people on overwhelm. And sometimes because we're rushing, the speed of life is that we're just not slowing down enough, and therefore the habits that we actually can access somehow go dormant, and we get into poor listening habits. So let's talk about a few of those so that we could start to just notice in ourselves if we ever do that, and we all do, myself included. So one of them is this blind spot of I-centric listening. We might be in a conversation, but if you could see from the little image on the right, somebody's talking and the other person might be thinking about things that are not necessarily salient to what the woman is saying. This gentleman might be thinking about what he is wanting to say next, or even his own interpretation. Of course, we're thinking why people speak, but the blind spot is it's sometimes I-centric, and we miss things. The late Stephen Covey said it so perfectly, and this is a very famous quote. Most people don't listen with the intent to truly to understand, but they listen with the intent to reply. So think about that for yourself. A little action item for you is to watch yourself in conversations. Are you already thinking about what you're going to say when somebody's speaking? I am guilty of doing that at times. I'm a fast kind of thinker, and I speak fast, and I kind of get ahead of myself sometimes. But often, if we could just train ourselves to slow down, sometimes we're surprised that what we thought they were going to say is not necessarily what we assumed. And the other thing, of course, is a lot of misunderstanding can occur when we do that. The other the other blind spot is assumptions. So we filter our listening through our own biases. And so one of the things that's really, really good is to make sure that we are aware that we do this and to self-manage and make sure that we double check that we are not filtering the listening through our assumptions, because that's where miscommunication and misunderstandings can occur. Now I'm going very fast through these things, but when we get to the ideas about how to do this better, all of this will be reinforced. Another blind spot is that we walk away from conversations where we actually think we remember what was said. But what we remember is actually only what we think we heard and what we think they said. So it's a little bit of a different play on this business of kind of the biased hearing. But this is an interesting quote. It's very famous. Many, many, many years ago, there was a Pentagon spokesperson by the name of Robert McCloskey. And he said, I know you think you understood what you think I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant. There's a lot in that quote. But think about your own experiences. Have you ever had a situation where you had a meeting with somebody, you kind of thought you were on the same page, you left the meeting, turns out one of you either forgot part of what you've said or you misinterpreted. You might have had the words right, but you didn't quite get the meaning of the intention. We leave meetings and we remember what we think the intention was, and we don't clarify enough. So our hearing, and this is definitely part of the listening spectrum. So we're rounding the corner and we're starting now to get into uh, something a little different. Um, we're going to head away from, all these blind spots and see if we can shed light to a healthier listening dynamic, which would be part of a conversational dynamic. Listening does not occur in silence. I'll say this up front because I have a slide at the very end and I don't want it to go lost, is that listening is never intended to be just, keep the mouth quiet and just listen. Listening does happen in the context of conversation. And there are things that you do to engage in the conversation to prime both yourself and to prime others to listen better. So we in the community of conversational intelligence practitioners, we talk about something called level 3 conversations, level 3 listening. And the listening that we do intentionally is to connect, to understand, and to share success. When we do that well, it promotes more trust and better outcomes. So in the little case study with Nick and Chloe, we saw that, in fact, that's exactly what Nick did so well. His objectives before the meeting were to connect, to put John at ease, but also he really wanted to understand. He didn't walk in with an already knowing, fully wrapped up level of understanding. He brought in a lot of curiosity. Of course, like any donor or anybody would want to share success, and in fact, because he had some starting ideas, he left a lot of room for him and John, the potential donor, to create success as opposed to this just being Nick's beautiful solution. So we're going to revisit this, but in order to really understand 3 levels of conversations, let me briefly introduce you to what these levels are. So I want to also be clear that the levels are not bad. Level 1 and 2 is not bad. We actually need all 3 levels in our conversational toolkit. It's just that far too often we overuse some of the levels or we misuse, and we underuse what we refer to as level 3. So level 1, I'll just give a very quick description, and then I'm going to dive into each of them a little bit deeper. Level 1 is what we call transactional. It's telling people. And in some ways, I'm doing that now in today's webinar because I think Marina probably mentioned a little earlier is when we have so many people on the line, it's hard to have like a back and forth conversation. But if we were a smaller group or we were in person or we were in a workshop, I would not be standing up here and just going through all my slides and telling you. There would be much more sharing and much more questions that are being asked. But level 1 is informing people, and it's absolutely important. It's part of your toolkit. We'll talk about that in a bit. Level 2 is, in terms of exchanging, it's exchanging information. You're giving information. Now, level 2 is power exchange. And so it could be if you're a leader, you might have a power dynamic just by virtue of having a higher power. So there's a little bit of level 2 inherent, and you have to be really sensitive to those conversations. But it also could be negotiations. It could be you, at a board meeting. It could be you in a staff meeting and negotiating ideas. And it's positional. And there can be a bit of a win-lose energy dynamic. It doesn't have to be that way, but when it's not, when it's a little bit overused, there could be a win-lose exchange of power. Number 3 is sharing, and this is very much what John's conversation was. It was, connecting, and it's sharing energy, okay, and it's co-creating. So let me not make this quite as mysterious. Let me go very briefly into each of the three. So level one is, as I said, very important for updates. For instance, board meetings, you have to update. You have to update your staff. You have to update your family, friends, keeping people in a loop, informing simple requests. Where it gets unhealthy is when your conversations are all level one and your listening is very low and you don't have very much inquiry and it's always telling. And it comes from an I-centric place. So I remember observing, I will not share the context, but there was a leader who had fabulous skills in a marketing context and great ideas. But how she operated with her team and even some of her suppliers was very, very level one. It was all using her team as, shall we say, just resources. So she did not do a good job at engaging their trust and even engaging their, their discretionary heart and soul efforts. It was a very low-level conversational dynamic. All she did was kind of give instructions, tell people what they had to do, and she was all about efficiency. And some people value that because it's, we're all busy, but she let that override, creating more trust. There was no listening in those conversations. It was all telling. Okay, so that was very damaging. So I wanted to bring that example in so that it's not just a donor story that like with Chloe and Nick. Level two is positional. So in a way, this is where Chloe was coming from positional. So first of all, let me just say positional is perfectly healthy and good. We do need to advocate a position. We do need to assert at times, and we need to make cases. And leaders do need to know when it's time to make a decision. So again, I want to reinforce that positional conversational dynamics are absolutely fine in our repertoire. It gets unhealthy when we listen only from a positional lens, and our listening is just to affirm or make your case. This often happens. Some salespeople do this, and they've learned to kind of close sales. They ask questions, but only to lead, so they kind of have an already knowing about what the answer is. They're leading people, and the questions are just to confirm their ideas, but they're really doing this to sell, and it's based on their solution. And what ends up happening is sometimes it's just fine. Again, I don't want to be an all or none person. Sometimes that works out okay, and the solution is a great solution, so it's not a problem. But often this is when people are more prone to get into a protective stance, and there's less trust and there's less connecting. So in Chloe's case, she didn't connect with John. She kind of didn't leave space in the conversation for discovery, for John to truly explore. And it was sort of like a one solution kind of one thing, and it just didn't work. I know when Judith was training the cohort that I was in for the conversational intelligence, she talked about an organization that was falling behind in sales pretty drastically and was at risk at really losing significant market share. And they brought her in, and she did some exploring and investigating with the salespeople. And she discovered that they were all in this positional kind of dynamic, which is the old style sales. And so she taught them to listen more and to be more curious and to do more level three conversations, and their sales went up dramatically. So most people who are in um, high level, donor relations know this and do this, but again, we sometimes forget our best practices. But level three, whether it be donor relations or be a conversation with an employee, a volunteer, a board member, or even your friends and family, level three is characterized by high levels of genuine listening, not fake listening where we're listening to be right. It is characterized by discovering with open-ended questions and really not yet knowing the answer, exchanging energy, not necessarily power. This inspires and engages, and it creates a collaborative dynamic. And many of you do this, you do this very well. Some of you will be nodding your heads because you already do this. But if you do this in some context, think about the context that you could do more of it. So what happens here is, as we saw with Nick, is we connect, we relate, there's win-win and high trust. It's only unhealthy when there's so much collaboration and there's no decision-making, or somebody's afraid to uh, make the appropriate level of advocating. So before we move into the rest of the slides are going to be 15 ways to supercharge your listening to level 3. And so before you do that, I'm going to invite you to think about your conversations. Think about the conversations you have in your work life, perhaps your volunteer life. You might even be a volunteer. I know that this webinar is, although Charity Village, it's for many of the members, there's many people who may not even work in the not-for-profit who may be partaking. So some of you may be on volunteer boards, or think about any context. And of course, your personal life. Think about you and your kids. Think about you and your loved ones. What levels, level 1, 2, 3, predominantly are reflected in your conversations? And what levels would you like to have more of, and where and with whom? And while we won't have tons of time now, I'd like you to think about that and then take that away. And Marina, I'm going to ask you, before I go to the next part of our session, is just a check-in. If there's any questions or comments, or even from you, just so that everybody could sort of breathe for a bit and sort of take it in, and if there's anything I need to just clarify or check in on.
No, everything's rolling along nicely. I will just remind all of our participants that we will be sending out that full recording and slide deck tomorrow. So if you missed anything, or you're feeling like you fell behind somewhere, that's no problem. And we will be doing the Q&A at the end of the session. So if you have questions, do put them in the chat box at any time, and we'll be holding those for the Q&A. So I think with that, I think we can carry on, Eileen.
Fantastic. Okay, so I will be going fast because, by the way, in the promotion materials I said 10 ways, but I was feeling really generous and I came up with 15. So I'm going to speak fairly quickly, but yes, you'll be able to get another listen through if you like. I also have a handout and some stuff for you to take away as reflection exercises. So, all right, the very first thing that I suggest is, I made up this acronym, this is mine, called SLOW. And it basically is going to set us up for the rest of the ideas that will come. So the first thing is literally just take a pause and notice if you are stressed, to try to de-escalate that. There's many ways to do that. Breathe, pause. Also just stop and slow down, and so that you can really check in with where you're at, and you can be present before you're about to step into a conversation. And you also, the listen part is to set listening intentions. Like Nick, superstar Nick did. He's a quieter guy, but he sure was, really high performing, because before he went to that meeting, he didn't just go into that meeting. He was very clear about his intentions, and they weren't just about saying this, saying that, selling this. They were about his presence, and he actually set intentions to be curious, to listen, to create trust, to put John, the potential donor, at ease as well. Now, you might also want to set some intentions for listening for your own conversational dialogue, because that's often what triggers the stress or the biases. So I think in a previous webinar that I did with you folks, we talked about things like the ladder of conclusions. I won't get too into that now, but you could challenge your own assumptions. So check in on your listening as well. Open yourself up. So don't barge into a meeting already knowing and already having it all mapped out, like the leader that I described, not just Chloe, because, gosh, Chloe was so well-meaning. Truthfully, I feel bad for Chloe because her heart was so in the right space. She just kind of missed this one. But the other leader that I described, that just goes to meetings already having it all mapped up, and it's about like the firing gun of just, blurting out everything, already knowing what it's all going to look like. Widening your listening focus. Try to get more of a we focus as opposed to an I-centric. And also also those access points, your listening access points, and we'll talk about that, listening through all the senses. So let's just dig into that with some very specific, dig in more to that SLOW acronym. So part of that is getting curious, like we heard Nick. Each one of us on this call has the strength of curiosity. Some will have a greater strength naturally. It comes very naturally for some people. But for those that it doesn't, know that you do have the ability, but you have to set the intention to ignite it. Okay? So I often coach clients on different things that they can be curious, they're just not accessing it. So you have to remind yourself to be curious and in a very intentional way to wonder more, assume less, and also just to ease up a little bit on already knowing. We're not asking you to give up everything you know. You have a lot of wisdom. We're not asking you to throw that out the window, but just ease up a little bit of knowing when you're in a conversation so that you truly can be present and not rushing ahead. We all have great ideas and we get pretty excited about them, and I do. I certainly do as well. But sometimes we get a little fixed in our our ideas, and there is something. This is a conversational intelligence kind of nugget. Being addicted to being right. We get a dopamine hit in the brain when we're right, and we like it. It feels good. And so sometimes we get a little fixed. So think about those moments when you walk into conversations where you might, even just for a moment, ease up on being so certain of your point of view so that you can leave space to listen for other possibilities. Because when we're so 100% sure that our way is the only way, the listening becomes positional, and there may not be room for other possibilities that would be win-win. For instance, in John's situation, he came up with starting thoughts for the donor, but when he was listening and he found out about the donor had a son, not a son, a brother he had lost, something else occurred to John, and therefore he was able to come up with a new idea that would be even more resonant than for the donor than what initially Nick was thinking about. So it serves everybody. Now, when we talked about the 3 levels, we did talk about asking questions. But don't ask questions that you already have the answer for. That's what we call level 1, level 2. It's a little bit manipulative. We want to be in discovery and ask questions you genuinely don't have answers to, and that's where the curiosity comes in. So ask open-ended questions. Help me understand. Tell me more about. And it was those kinds of questions and that kind of curiosity that probably won Nick, the trust of John, because he probed and he genuinely said, tell me why you want to be making this endowment. He didn't make assumptions that, there were so many assumptions that one could make. He's wealthy, it's a great tax advantage, he already does a lot of donating, and la, 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 la. No, he parked all of assumptions and he asked. Now on the right, you see this little phrase called double click. That's a little phrase from the world of conversational intelligence that we say double click on that. That's like saying ask questions for which you do not have answers to. The little picture of a folder is when you look on your computer and you see on your desk the icon of a folder, we double click to see what's inside. So in your conversations, double click with others and double click with yourself. Double click on your own assumptions. Double click on what you're thinking. Double click, and that will lead to better listening. Ask clarifying questions. I worked with a whole team not too long ago, and we came up with a charter of how they wanted to show up with themselves and others in their organization. It was 20 people in this department. And one of the things they came up with was a commitment to seek clarity. Because far too often people go to meetings, they kind of listen, they hear, but they leave with different interpretations like we talked about, and confusion. And so it is okay in your conversations to truly listen for where you need clarity, and then ask, and then listen until you get the clarity. Okay, this is a biggie for me. Folks, I have to work so hard at this one. Watch your pace. Are you finishing people's sentences? Are you cutting in too often? And are you leaving enough space in the conversations for others to express and be heard? So if you have a big personality, or you have lots to say, or if you're very dynamic and you're or maybe you just live through your voice and you're a little bit of an extrovert. You might be taking up a lot of space and not giving people a chance to express, and so you'll need to watch that. It's something that I have to pay attention to, and finishing people's sentences. I know that's happened to me. I come from a lovely family, but we are interrupters, and nobody could finish a sentence at our family gatherings, and it's exhausting. And so I now try extra hard to watch out for that on my end, because interrupting is so far away from giving the gift of listening. Now, I stumbled upon this helpful little tip. If you're an interrupter, here's a good one. Wait. Why am I talking? And I thought that was very, very helpful. So I thought I would share that for any of you who are interrupters. And if somebody's interrupting you, you can just literally just politely raise your hand and say, well, please, may I finish my sentence? Please, would you allow me to finish? Please please hear me out. With a pleasant enough tone, but some people who interrupt, like myself, at times, we are well-meaning, and it's a habit that we may not be aware of, so you can try to ask for that if you're on the receiving end for that. Words matter, and when we're listening superficially, sometimes we just take the words for face value. So that's where you need to double-click and dig deeper. So if somebody says, I want more, I want more responsibility at work, or I want more in this relationship, or I want more communications, or I want, what does more mean? So that's where you need to double click. What more might mean for you, you might say, great, my direct report wants more responsibility, and you go off and you give them all kinds of stuff. But that's not what they were wanting or needing to grow. So just make sure that words can create worlds of meaning. So when you hear a word, and you're not 100% sure if you're on the same page, you can double click and make sure, and just ask a discovery question. Tell me more about what that means to you. Tone matters too. So, what's beneath the tone that somebody is expressing something? If somebody says, I get it, but they kind of sound a little confused. I know in coaching sometimes I'll be, talking to somebody and I'll say, how do you feel about such and such? Or we might be giving them some takeaway homework. But I could just tell in their tone that there's something, there's a little objection. And, that gives me the invitation to double click and check in on that just to make sure that we're on the right track. Now, email. There's a lot of tone that occurs in email, and sometimes it's unintentional. If you're an emailer, and as opposed to picking up the phone, be careful about being so brief, because sometimes somebody on the receiving end will hear that and listen to that in its brevity and just think that sometimes there's assumptions that are made about that. And I've coached many people and I've counseled many people who have talked about some relationship kind of breakdowns or some discomfort because they just felt a chill in the email. The reality was some people are just very, we're all busy, and some people are all about efficiency, and there's no kind of warmth in the emails. So if you're the recipient of a very brief email and you're wondering, whoa, that seemed pretty curt, and you're worrying about that, just be careful of the assumptions you're making and double-click on that and perhaps use real conversation instead of email for certain topics. Okay, a couple more before we wind down. We're almost just a few more slides. These are critically important. Earlier I said widen your listening. And you want to be widening your listening with the touch points from where are you listening from. So by all means, as Mark Twain said, we have two ears. Make sure you're listening with the ears, but you also want to listen with the other senses. And your eyes, what do you notice? And again, use that. You have to go back to that earlier slide, bring in your curiosity and those intentions to just pay attention. What's going on with somebody's body language, their eye expressions, or eye contact. And if that's not aligning with what they're saying, don't make an assumption, but double-click on that. Hey, ask the question. Say, I'm just noticing that you just look a little, confused, or you don't look like you really, this feels right to you. I'm just wondering, what's that about? Be very careful about definitives. There's a lot of talk about, oh, if somebody has this body language, it means that. One common one is if somebody folds their arms, it means that they're closed. And be very careful about any assumption you make. Instead, double-click and ask about it. I'll tell you, give you a quick example. I was giving a workshop, and this woman was sitting there with her arms closed, and I did wonder if she was feeling a little protective and uncomfortable being in the workshop. Anyways, we had a little chat at a break, and she shared with me, I just checked in with her, but she shared with me that she's always cold. And she finds when she holds herself like that, it's more comfortable for her, but she was very comfortable in the workshop. And that's just one of many examples. Another quick one is, I know when I'm concentrating and not engaged. When I'm engaged, I look fairly happy. I'm a very pretty positive person. But when I'm concentrating in deep thought, I might look a little sometimes serious or unhappy. I've had strangers come up to me and say, hey, cheer up. And I thought, what the heck are they talking about? It's just the shape of my face. So be very careful with that. But do use signals and double-click and check in. And that's a different kind of listening. This one, I love this one. Listen with that feeling. What are you feeling in a conversation? So let's go back to Nick, okay? Nick, certainly he was warming up the conversation, but, the donor, John, he wasn't forthcoming off the bat. And so sometimes you're going to have conversations with people in any context, whether it be donor or any context, where people aren't always forthcoming. And we all have intuition, but the difference between many people is um, some people are more tuned into their intuition, and they set intentions to listen to their intuition. But everybody in this room has times where they've had a hunch or they had a feeling. And so that's the kind of listening that you can do too. And again, what you want to do with that is double-click, not make assumptions. Check in on that hunch. And that's what Nick did with John. He said, hey, tell me a bit more about, you made a very, very small comment, but would you mind telling me more? Nick had a hunch. There was something underneath that comment that John made about having had a brother, and he had a connection. And he kind of said it in a very light way. I know it sounds like an obvious thing to double-click, but in the conversation it was sort of in passing. So check in on your hunches. You might have a colleague or a volunteer or a board member and something that they're saying, and you're just wondering, they may not seem pleased or they may seem troubled, and maybe they're not saying it. So you could double-click and in a trusting way check in on that. And that's really quality listening. What you may not realize is that it's not just your cognitive brain, in your head that does all the listening. Your heart actually has a brain, and it's there that is the home for intuition. There are so many cellular activities and receptors for seeing things that, in fact, our heart brain clues into information well before our head brain. And that's where gut feeling occurs. And so tap into that, and all you have to do is just set the intention, slow down a little bit, and check in with yourself. And I would, as an action item, I would ask you to just play with that in the week ahead, or think back to times when you had a gut feeling and maybe you didn't check in on it, but turned out you were right, or maybe you did. And the other piece too is why it's so great to be tuned into what your heart is telling you is that there are mirror neurons, and that helps you. That could actually be, if somebody is feeling uncomfortable and you're in close proximity, you might be feeling that because of something called mirror neurons. You mirror what they're feeling, and if you're starting to feel what they're feeling, you have access to information, and you could double-click and check in on that. It's not just a hunch. There's actually neurochemistry happening here. And so conversational intelligence, I know we just did a little bit of a dive today, but there's so much that can help you tune into your listening. There's neurochemistry at play, but there's also wisdom, and your wisdom does lie in your heart in a very real way. And then that other piece about broadening and listening wider that we talked about in the SLOW acronym is listening from a we orientation. And to do that, you really do need to try as best you can to stand in somebody else's shoes and practice that empathy and try to listen from that place as best you can. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier, and I wanted to prime you so that you would hear it again. This is more of a reinforcement, but listening does not happen. Some people make the mistake, they say, I don't talk, I just listen. I got to tell you, that's a huge mistake. I once had somebody who I was speaking to, and she didn't say anything at all. She thought she was just doing good listening, but she made me horribly uncomfortable because she wasn't acknowledging that she was hearing or how she was feeling about what she was hearing. And I remember bringing this up, that that is not healthy dynamics. That is not good listening. Good listening acknowledges and shows you're listening, and it's active. It might be a smile, it might be a nod, it might be a hum, it might be affirming what you heard. It might be a question double-clicking. So it is not dead silence, folks. It is about connecting. It is about truly trying to understand. It's about being respectful of the neuroscience between you and others. And there's so much really at play. So this brings us close to the end here, where we're going to open up questions, but I want you to reflect on what you heard today, what you're taking away, and how will you elevate your listening. And so I did create a 2-page reflection questionnaire that I would love you to download and take away and see what you can play with in the weeks ahead. And but for now, I thank you. I thank you for your listening as I was talking at you for all this time. I would love to hear your comments on Twitter. I would love to see you on my Facebook page. By all means, visit me at Big Cheese Coaching and sign up for my newsletter too. So, Marina, I think I'm here for as long as people want, another, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 minutes, whatever people need for questions.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Eileen. Yes, we're going to jump right into questions here. So perhaps just on something that you just touched on just recently, intuition. Do you have tips for helping people to develop that intuition?
Yes. So one thing, I don't know if anybody is into even meditation. You don't have to do a half an hour of meditation. You don't have to do even 10 minutes. Even if you took 2-3 minutes and you did some deep, close your eyes, close your breath, go to the washroom to do that, or just, close your door if you have an office, or do whatever you need to do. But literally breathe deeply and imagine that you are breathing through your heart. And breathe in through your heart and breathe out through your heart. This is actually from Heart Math, and it's called a quick coherence exercise. And as you do that, you try to connect to a positive feeling, because that will open up the channel between your head and your heart brain. And so you'll have more access and more integration. So you do that for 2-3 minutes and practice that daily. And that is one great way to integrate the information that you're receiving from your heart and bring it to your head. The other, so that I would say, I'm doing that with all my clients now. I'm inviting them to, teaching them a little bit of heart math. And we're doing that before our sessions so that we could be more present to possible insights and wisdom. And the other thing I would simply say is just literally ask yourself, set an intention. You don't realize if you say, I'd like to tap into my intuition, and literally you could put your hand on your heart. It sounds a little woo-woo to some people, but you'd be shocked to hear that what you're doing is you're setting your brain like a reticular activation that alerts like a GPS for you to tune in. And it's sometimes as easy as that. And ask yourself, what does my gut say? What does my intuition say? And be still with that. Breathe in. Don't rush it. Slow down. And just see what comes. Try it out. Experiment.
Awesome. And we just had one question asking you to repeat the resource name for the heart breathing.
Oh, it's Heart Math, and you could look that up, and it's the quick coherence exercise.
Great. And here's a good question on the same topic. How do you know whether you're truly intuiting the other person's feelings, or that you're maybe putting your own feelings onto the situation?
Oh, what a great question. Whoever asked that question, thank you, thank you. You double click. You don't know. You never make hard and fast assumptions. So if you're wondering and intuiting, you check in. And so that's the beauty of conversation. So I do that with my coaching clients. Sometimes I'll say, I'm wondering, I'm getting a feel, that you have, you're not quite right with this, or there's something else that you want to say. I'm just wondering, or you seem uneasy about this, or you seem excited about that, and I'm not sure if I'm making it up or if that is the case. And I'll ask them to share. So what you do is you double click and you check in. You ask the question. Do not walk away with hard and fast assumptions, because that leads you into that bias place, because you could be wrong. Don't worry, your intuition sometimes will work and sometimes other things will be at play, and it's good to always wonder more and assume less.
Great. And we've had a lot of questions coming in about how you might help someone else, or how you might best communicate with someone else who maybe is practicing level 1 or level 2 communications. Do you have some suggestions about that, Eileen, when you're in that situation?
Yeah. Well, one of the things to start with is to model it. Another thing is, in a sharing but authentic way, is to have a conversation about conversations. And often I coach people about this, or sometimes even in my workshops, I'll talk about having conversations about conversations. So if you're, for instance, in a team, you could, you could actually, have create together some principles of how you want to show up together in your conversations, and some principles to build trust. And you can co-create that. And that would be, that's a really useful exercise. But in a one-on-one, you could literally just say, hey, I'm wondering if we could even just have a conversation about how we're engaging, and be in a very transparent, but be very careful with your tone, and make it about, I really want to hear what you're saying, and I really want you to hear what I'm saying. You want to not be in a judgy way. You don't want to shut them down. You want to open them up. So when you have that conversation about conversations, you want to do it in a way that primes them for trust. So think about how you set up that conversation. Say, hey, I'm noticing that, you know, you seem to be, whatever, rushing, and I know the efficiency is important, but, the impact on me is I feel that I'm not having a chance to be heard, and I'd really like to contribute and be heard. Can we just have a conversation about that? There's ways to say it, and it does take a great deal of sensitivity, but it also takes candor and transparency. So I work with people often on how to frame up that conversation, because your goal is to make sure that you don't trigger somebody into a defensive way, that you trigger them into a place of trust and say, hey, this conversation really matters to me, or what we're working on really matters to me, or you want to come from a place of acknowledging the relationship. You really matter to me, but I find myself getting triggered in this conversation, and if we could just talk about that, so that I really have some stuff I want to be able to, say, and maybe our dynamics, we could just be a little bit more generous with each other, and here's what I'm noticing. I'm just giving you some examples of what that might look like. You've got to have your own words. Maureen, do you think that gave a little bit of guidance? Is that helpful?
I think that's great. Yes, I think that's
Yeah.
very helpful. So moving on to another topic, we've had a number of questions about this as well, probably not surprising considering the world we live in today, but how would you suggest someone who maybe feels a bit distracted when they're listening, either in a meeting or just, in a one-on-one conversation, how can they kind of slow themselves down and really pay attention?
Yeah, great question. It all comes down to intentions. And I know I did a whack of slides today, and probably too many slides really to take it all in. But I'd go back to that slide that's the slow side. It says slow. The biggest thing you can do, if you can create a habit, and it takes about 30 days to create a new habit. So every single day in the next 30 days, when you're about to go into a conversation, set the intention for how you want to show up in that conversation, and the conversation could be a meeting. And set an intention for listening, and notice when you're not, and catch yourself, because it does take a habit to rewire our ways of being. We all have become addicted to our emails, and we are impatient because so much is going on. That goes to my, my book, Ease. We're managing overwhelm in times of crazy busy. But with it, there's so much at stake, and we lose so much in our, we live a life of rush, and we're never really present. And so one of the things that I know when I think about some of the people in my life that I know are great listeners, it is, remember what a gift it is. It's a gift for you, too. It's not just a gift for others. If you go to a meeting and you tune in and you stay present versus multitasking, you're actually, in this, I'm kind of going back to my ease talk, but you're giving your brain a bit of a rest and a fuel up, because your brains actually enjoy focus time, and all the distracting activity that we do is exhausting. It consumes more energy from the brain. So if you could discipline yourself to get in the habit and set intentions each and every day, how do I want to show up in this conversation, in this meeting, but not just show up. What kind of listening do I want to do, and what does that mean that I need to do less of, and what does that mean I need to do more of? There's a worksheet in the 2-page handout that you can download that Marina has kindly put up, that allows you to write out what you need to do less of, what you need to do more of. It also allows you to write out your intentions. And it's only through making deliberate intentions, writing it out, and declaring it that you will start to develop a habit of listening more. It's not a one-time thing. You need to develop that habit. And I'm pretty sure if you do more of that, you will start to see so much more positive results in terms of the trust, even in terms of your energy and outcomes and productivity.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Eileen. I think we're going to be cognizant of time here, and I know that we have gone over a bit, so I think we're going to end there. Did you have any final comments you wanted to make, Eileen?
I just want to say thank you so much to Charity Village for inviting me. This is my 3rd time here, and I always love being with your community. I want to say thank you to the community. I hope those of you that are members of Twitter, please keep the conversation going. I'd love to continue the conversation on my Facebook Big Cheese Coaching page and see some of you sign up for newsletters. So just a big thank you, and I hope we get to continue the conversation and that we all become better listeners, myself included, so that we really create space for better things to happen in all of our lives.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Eileen. It's always a pleasure having you here presenting for us, and I think you've given us lots to think about today with this presentation. So before we sign off, I do want to remind everyone that we'll follow up with you by email tomorrow morning with the webinar recording, the slide deck, and the 2-page handout that Eileen mentioned. So you will get all of that by email tomorrow. We will also include a link to a short survey, so if you can take a moment to fill that out, it helps us to plan our content going forward. You'll have a place there that you can let us know if there's topics you'd like to see covered in a future session. And with that, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks so much, everyone. Goodbye.